Good morning, everyone. We're going to be working now with Ananda's Festival of Light. And yesterday I was just talking in general about how Swamiji makes decisions and what is considered to be consistent with Master's path. This is going to be, I think, a very long and multifaceted discussion as we go page by page through this ritual. The ritual takes about 10 minutes or 15 minutes to perform with all the music, but every line in it is very rich. So let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dear friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel the wisdom of your presence, enlightening our hearts and minds, that everything we consider becomes rich with the symbolism of your divine presence behind it. Help us to feel the meaning of your words and more deeply to reach your consciousness through those words. We are your children. Guide us home. Om. Peace. Amen. In 1986, in November, I and several of my friends took a pilgrimage tour to India. We actually led the tour, and it was the first time that Ananda had led a pilgrimage to India, and the 30 or so Americans who went with us, I think we might have had one Brazilian woman with us, but it was mostly Americans. We're all going to India for the first time. I knew before I went on that India trip that I was going to be leaving Ananda village and moving to take responsibility for the work here in Palo Alto, which I've been doing ever since. So it was a time of big transition personally. Also, it was actually a time of transition for Ananda itself. Swami had sent Ananda and Maria to Sacramento that summer, and then David and I were going to come to Palo Alto in January. And this was a very large commitment of Ananda energy to establishing Ananda centers and ultimately communities in places other than the village. Now, because Ananda has spread all over the globe, we think of that very easily. But at that time, we did have a house in San Francisco. We did have a house in San Francisco. We had a house in Sacramento. We had a house in Palo Alto. But it was considered to be almost like they were feeder zones for Ananda village rather than actual, the idea that we would really establish on a permanent basis in other locales. And so we were starting the same in Sacramento and Seattle at that point, also in Portland. And so it was a really big transition moment for Ananda. Swamiji had also gotten married in September of '85. He was married to Rosanna Golia at that time. And she was part of a charismatic Catholic group in southern Italy. She was Italian citizen. And Swami had written the oratorio. He was making an effort to have Master's teachings move in, if possible, into traditional Christian churches. So there was a whole mindset of thinking in another way. I believe at that time we had changed our name. It had been the Yoga Fellowship, which was the legal name of what Ananda was. It was still, we called ourselves Ananda, but the legal entity was called the Yoga Fellowship. And we changed it to the Fellowship of Inner Communion, because this was Swami's effort to create something that would be acceptable to the established Christian churches. It didn't work and didn't last, and so eventually we gave it up, but that was what was happening then. And in that same month, we went to India in October, and during the month of October and into November, Swamiji took a seclusion, and the work was also starting in Italy at this time, and they had been located in the north of Italy at Lake Como. One of the devotees, their family had a villa on the lake, and so she gave the villa over to be used to establish an Ananda center, which enabled us to begin. It was a summer villa, and they wintered over Lake Como for what turned out to be the coldest winter in 100 years. And it was there was a lot of tapasya in the small band of people who worked through that. Jyotish, who is now with his wife Devi, the worldwide director of Ananda, grew up in the state of Minnesota, which in the US is one of the coldest, snowiest places. And after that winter in Italy, Jyotish said he'd always wondered why he'd been born in Minnesota, but it was so that he could go through the coldest winter in 100 years in Italy in an uninsulated, barely heated house, and just say, well, that wasn't so bad. But it was tough. But all of this was coming together. But then the center in the location in Como was not conducive to what we were trying to do. As Swami said, it was a vacation area. And so they conceived of the need to move to another part of Italy, and the place that they settled on, not surprisingly, was Assisi, Italy, which is one of the holiest places in Italy, and people come there for spiritual reasons, so the whole atmosphere is focused on the power of God rather than the power of pleasure and good times, which there's no harm in having holidays, but if you're going to start an ashram, to start it in Assisi makes more sense. So they were closing up the villa in Como, and they were moving to a place in Assisi that they rented, which was called San Fortunato, which was an old monastery, a little chapel and a small monastery there. Eventually we moved to the place called Il Refugio, which is where we're settled now, but in that winter of '86, this is where they were. So as it happened, we came back, 4 of us, I think there were just 4 of us, came from our first pilgrimage of India to see Swami in Assisi. Swamiji had been in seclusion for this whole period of time. The Italian residents, who were mostly Americans, but they were nonetheless the pioneers of the Italian center, moved down from Lake Como. We and the residents arrived in Assisi at the same time. Swami they had rented a house for Swami. Swami came out of seclusion, and we all came together at the same moment. And it was I'm sure astrologically it would have been very interesting. It was a very potent time. I believe it was in November by this time, some halfway. I think we took a holiday in India before we came over. That's how it would have worked. And Swamiji had just gone into seclusion. He'd been completely out of touch. Usually when Swamiji is writing something or creating something, he brings people along as he does it. I have countless emails from Swami with chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3 of so many of his different books. When he was writing the Gita, his commentary on the Gita, he wrote it at his home in Gurgaon, India. And as it happened, I and no less than 30 other people visited him during the 2 months it took him to write. And during the time that I was there and all the way through, Swami wrote 10 pages a day, and he would put them on the dining room table, the coffee table. And when you would come over, or if you were staying in the house, when you came downstairs in the morning, he would have the papers there, and you would read them, and then you would talk about them that day. Or he would email them across the world. I say that because we were used to being part of his creative process, so we were very surprised when Swami announced to us that he had written a ritual, and that he wanted to, it was called the Festival of Light, and he was going to, the second night that we were there, we were all going to gather in this little chapel in San Fortunato, and he was going to present this to us. We had no idea that he was thinking about this. He really, at least in my hearing, perhaps he'd discussed it with others, but I'd never heard him even discuss the idea. But a lot of times when something was very sensitive, and I don't mean sensitive in the sense that people get their feelings hurt, but the attunement is very sensitive. Swami would not speak of it until he was ready to bring it forth. And he explained to us that for many years, he'd felt that Ananda needed some kind of a unifying ritual that would define our worship and our attunement, not only with God, but with each other. I want to back up just a step. This is partly what I was going to say yesterday, but I realized I never actually finished this thought. I started talking about how Swamiji, when he started building Ananda, he started following the same basic ways that Master had done things. Master did not use Hindu rituals. He did not use, he didn't follow the ways of the pujaris, of the priests. Master actually fundamentally had two Sanskrit mantras, the Gayatri mantra and the Mahamrityunjaya mantra. So Swamiji kept those, and we did a fire ceremony with those two mantras, and that was part of our Sunday morning gathering. Master also, when he came to the West, he stepped into the Western concept of how you practice religion, which always included Sunday morning worship, Sunday morning community worship, where you gather in the church and have some kind of a formal ceremony. So Master just moved right into Sunday mornings, which is not universal. That's the way it's done here. This is the concept of the Sabbath. This is all out of the Bible, the Old and the New Testament. And so observing the Sabbath, for the Jews it was Friday night through Saturday night. For the Christians it was Sunday morning. And then he did something that was essentially like a Western service. There was music, there would be something like a sermon, there would be scripture reading. And so when Swamiji started Ananda and we started having these same Sunday gatherings, it was the same model. We would pray, we would have music, but the music would be our chanting. We would also have a period of silent meditation. And then the scriptures that we would refer to would be the Bible, especially the New Testament, and the Bhagavad Gita, because Master came, as I was saying yesterday, to teach the original teachings of Jesus, the original teachings of Krishna, and to show that they were the same teaching. But I should say, at Ananda it was exceedingly informal. And that basic structure was followed, but there was a tremendous amount of latitude as to what you would read and how you would read it, what music you would do, what sermon topic you might have. It was very, very free. And we never had any liturgical garb. Those who would lead the service, well, Swamiji being a Swami, during those years he always wore orange. It was before he changed the color to blue. He always wore orange. He always wore Indian garb, which made it seem like liturgical garb, but it was really just Indian clothes. But he would wear Indian clothes, and we tended to, formal dress for us was Indian style. So usually if you were giving the sermon, you would wear well, actually that's not true. The men would wear Indian, because the women, we didn't particularly like to put on saris. And so we didn't really have any other costume, so we would just wear some appropriate garb. But it was still very informal, the whole flow of it. And a lot of people liked it because there was just no hint of institutionalism to it at all. And there was a commitment to that, partly because Master's organization, SRF, had become much more rigid and traditional looking and behaving, and we liked being the opposite of that. So there was also a commitment to that kind of a feeling. So here we are, we're now in 1987, 86, and we're all meeting in Assisi, and Swami tells us that he's written a ritual. And it was, I didn't have a bias one way or another, but not everyone thought that that was such a great idea, because we really had liked the freedom that we had. So we gathered in this little stone chapel, and because the residents of that place had also just arrived, nothing was really fixed up very well, so we just had a table and just put framed pictures of the masters. It was hardly a formal altar. Swamiji had written a couple of pieces of music, one piece completely, and I think he'd written words for something else. So he gave the music to Lakshman Simpson, who was there at the time, who was a very, very capable musician. And he could simply read it and play it and sing it without having to have much rehearsal or any rehearsal of any kind. So Swami gave him the music. And then we gathered in this chapel, and the experience of it is exceedingly vivid in my mind. It was cold. It was a stone building. It was not particularly, it was austere, that's the word. But because it was stone, and because it was a place that none of us knew very well, it became the backdrop, it became a very timeless moment to be there. Was it a cave in the mountains? Was it the catacombs, underground during the time of Jesus? Were we simply in 1987 in this church? Were we Catholic priests, during the Dark Ages? It was very hard to know. And during the course of the time that we went through this ritual, all of those different identities came. And there was a tremendous awareness on the part of all of us that this was an important moment. And Swamiji explained to us then that he had, for a long time, he said, he'd been wanting to create more ritual for Ananda. But every time he said he tried to do it, he felt an inward caution that basically said, not yet. Now, part of why I was talking yesterday about the vibration, the blueprint in the ether, is that whenever Swamiji did anything that really was an apparent departure from the way Master did it, he would never make that decision lightly. And it was not unusual to hear, I've been thinking about this for years, and I didn't feel it was quite the right timing, but now was the timing. When Swami sort of officially added guitars to our chanting sessions, he was very slow to do it and thought a great deal about it because Master didn't use guitars. So it was going to change the feeling somewhat of the chanting, and Swami wanted to be certain that he felt Master's imprint and approval on it, which he did eventually. Not that we always chant with guitars, but it opened the door more widely. So Swami said he was in seclusion, and the thought of writing this ritual came to him, and as it came to him, it was essentially the whole energy to do it. And so he wrote it while he was in seclusion. He received it, and he talked to us about different parts of it. There's a song called The Thunder of Om, which Swami uses the word jazzy. It kind of has has more of a beat, has more of a rhythm. It's just a very different kind of song than you might think would be the choice at that point. But Swami said it just came to him. And the more he worked with it, and the more he heard it, the more he felt the energy of it was just exactly what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be the thunder of Om. So it needed to have that kind of pulsing power in it. And also, at the heart of the ritual, as we'll see as we go through the pages, there's this allegorical story about a little bird and about the bird's journey sort of through the stages of understanding, from being given a divine mission to rebelling against that mission, to becoming a truth seeker, and then finally to becoming free. And that allegory has been one of the most profound parts of the Festival of Light. But Swami told us, he said when he was writing, all of a sudden he just came to him, a little bird, a fledgling bird, that was the phrase. And Swami said, literally, he wrote a fledgling bird, and then he stopped and he said to Master, whoever he was communing with, really, a fledgling bird? It was not, none of it was a conscious, it wasn't rational on Swami's part. He didn't just reason it out. Now we need a story about something, how about a bird? It was rather the bird appeared in the work that he was doing. And so Swami just allowed it to unfold because at that stage and for a long time in his spiritual life, Swami just trusted. He had earned the right to trust his intuition. Over many decades, of spiritual practice, he now could feel when something was a true inspiration, and he was fearless in just going forward to see where it would lead. As he said at one point, I'm accustomed to trusting my heart. And so he just went with that. So, but none of this, it was all new to us. So we sat together, and I say there must have been about 20, maybe 25 people. And then Swami, all by himself, read through. He actually refined the language a great deal after this initial reading, because this was the first time he himself was just going to try it out for us. So we sat with him in that cold, slightly dark chapel, and he read the whole Festival of Light to us for the first time and introduced us to the songs, and then invited us to come up, and he blessed each of us with the touch of light for the first time. He did it personally with the candle, with making the arati. As we go through, for those of you unfamiliar, but you can watch any Ananda service anywhere in the US or Europe, and you'll see this. In India, they use it less often, and you'll see this ritual carried out. And then there it was. That was the first time. And Swamiji then brought that back to America when he came to, and he was saying to us, okay, now here's the part of it. He said, the reason for ritual is that one of the things that we're trying to do on the spiritual path, you see, we're trying to re-educate not only the conscious mind, but the subconscious mind. Because the subconscious mind is what constantly feeds. There's the superconscious inspiration, and there's the subconscious level. The subconscious level, the way we use it, means everything that's already happened. The superconscious is all the new potential that you have. The subconscious is everything that's already happened. And the subconscious mind just is not creative, except that it can rearrange the facts that it has, but it's not creative in the sense that it can't manifest something that's never happened before. That comes from the superconscious mind. It can rearrange the pieces so it may look new, but it still has to already have been in there. So reprogramming the subconscious mind, so what it has in there is positive and helpful and uplifting and God reminding, is one of the many things that we're doing on the spiritual path. That's what affirmations and prayers and chanting and mantras, it's like telling the subconscious mind what's important. And everything that we do, the subconscious mind stores. We program it. So the more we are in good company, the more we do sadhana, the more we do spiritual study, the more we do of practice, the more we do of uplifting music, the subconscious mind gradually gets oriented that way. And what happens then is, in times of crisis, it feeds you helpful information. I mean, after 12 years on the spiritual path, at my 36th birthday, actually, it was almost literally my birthday, I was aware of the fact that 12 years of spiritual practice and life at Ananda had tipped the balance of my subconscious mind. So it was more inclined to offer me a positive, spiritually oriented idea than it was to offer me some grim, negative, insecure idea. And the tip was not like, it didn't like flip, 40 degrees or something. It flipped about 2 degrees, but it was it was oriented toward the spiritual now. I mean, I'm sure all of you have had experiences of waking up with a chant in your mind, or a prayer, or an affirmation, or in a time of stress, suddenly you start hearing positive ideas in your mind. It's your subconscious mind helping you out. So Swami pointed out that ritual is, and I think there's more I'm going to have to say about this, but that ritual itself is one of the ways that we take the subconscious mind, we penetrate the subconscious mind deeper and deeper and deeper. The very repetitious nature of it causes the subconscious mind to be able to absorb it without a lot of intellectual qualification. So if the ritual is powerful, clear, and if the words that are related to it have poetic rhythm, rhythm as being a great part of it, have rhythm, it gradually, the subconscious mind gradually begins to accept that rhythm. And as I say, it will become what it keeps feeding back to us. And so, and so it is proved, is what I would say. It's like the elements of the Festival of Light, certain parts of it, even the first line, let us lift our hearts in a festival of light. It's like we start by lifting up our hearts into the light. And so every Sunday, or whenever we hear that, every time we hear that, oh, let us lift up our hearts. And that whole idea comes to us. Or the story of the bird. We had a divine mission, and now we're in the revolt, but now we're entering the quest. And because the words are super consciously infused, that would be the way that I would say it. They're super consciously infused. They do not operate like ordinary words. They operate like mantras, is actually what we want to say, even though it's not mantra in the way that we normally think of it, because we think of it as essentially a discrete formula. But it's mantra in the sense of it's the power of sound to convey not only the meaning of those words, but the actual vibratory reality of what those words represent. And when you enter into ritual on a regular basis that is not so complicated that you have to have a guidebook to do it, or not so boring, or that's done with real energy, then it completely shifts. It can have a transforming effect on our spiritual life. And it's community. It's the way that people who have shared spiritual aspiration can come together, even if they don't know each other in a personal way, can all come together and meld our energies in one focus. Swami says group meditation also has that capacity, but often when people meditate, they're not meditating with everyone. They're there with everyone, but the meditation itself is carried out in a solitary manner. But when you have a ritualized group worship, then everybody's energy is drawn together in the single focus, the repetition of the words, the singing of the songs, the coming forward of the blessing, even the rising and the sitting down again together begins to create a very powerful vortex, especially over a long period of time, repeated with real concentration. Now, of course, ritual is not magic. It is only a potential that can really change our consciousness if we participated in the right way. And that's why, for years, Swamiji wanted ritual for Ananda, because he felt it could create a dynamic spiritual core. And the timing was exactly right. We were beginning to expand out and try to plant the essence of Ananda in many different locations. And he felt now was the time when we needed to have some powerful tools with us if we were going to be able to succeed at that God-given task. God bless you, my friend.